All right, Moshe, obviously the Eagles win the game yesterday, and you heard the press conference, I'm sure. The big takeaway is everybody's talking to Nick about his actions after the game. Did that, to you, overshadow other things in that game yesterday?
Well, not for me, Mike, but I know, obviously what the fans think or what the owner thinks or the team management thinks is different. I mean, I certainly think that it's a situation that we've been talking about now for basically since his first year, and it wasn't as big of a deal when the Eagles were winning every game and looking good and going to the Super Bowl, but it's become a big deal because when you're losing, those things stand out. But not just because you're losing, it's more that they get covered up by winning. We have talked quite a bit about his on-field behavior and the way he works, not just the officials, but the other fans or how the whole fans. He's got to find a balance, Mike. And I think that's the biggest issue right now is nobody should not have to be themselves. They tell you to be yourself, and I agree. The players said they wanted Nick to go back to being himself. That's fine. But in a professional industry, what happens when you yourself also includes cartoonish behavior that's not becoming of the position that you hold? You have to be you have to do a better job of finding the right balance so that you are yourself, but you are not a caricature of yourself.
Yeah, and I think, your point that you're making is valid in that he is the guy who, Moshe, you got me?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Did you lose me somewhere in there?
No, I got you.
Okay.
We're on location today, so it's a little loud in here. We're at the sports book, so there's a lot of people getting ready for this baseball game. But that said, we just had Sirianni on, and, he essentially said, look, I'm sorry, I'm disappointed, but my energy, I have to direct it better in coaching and motivating. But your point that you're bringing up is, that's one thing a couple of years ago where the team was rocking and rolling and your team is winning and you're winning convincingly and you're winning clean. I think you said on Inside the Birds, correct me if I'm wrong, you wanted to see an impressive victory. Would you label yesterday's game as an impressive victory? Because if not, that's where the problem comes in. He's essentially taunting the fans in a game where the fans are not happy with the way that team looked, even in victory.
Yeah, and that sort of shows the disconnect between maybe his understanding of that win versus the fans' understanding of the win. And there's always two different ways to look at wins. And I'm really curious. Jason Avant and Quentin Michael, I'm going to ask them to talk about this for Q&A, which will come out tomorrow morning on Inside the Birds, because players almost always say a win is a win and they don't care about style points. But I know that players, when they're done with their career and they become analysts, right, they look at wins differently than they did when they played. So, and it was interesting to hear Lane Johnson really come out and say this is not an acceptable, I think he said it was a constipated offense. So it's very uncommon that you hear players criticize themselves in a win because usually it's the win is the thing. But, Mike, we've talked about this. This Eagles team was not constructed to be a team that sort of builds it up and you're happy with any win and you're hoping that, you show the progress throughout the year. It was built to be able to rub elbows with the Lions, with the 49ers, with the Packers, which, they did beat the Packers. But right now, I think most people looking at this team, even objectively or throwing their fan card out the window, most people look at the team and say, it's kind of hard to see them going real far and being a Super Bowl contender when they're really falling over themselves, having special teams problems, having offensive constipation, as Lane Johnson said, and still not really being great defense. I mean, we can look and say where they really only gave up 9 offensive points to the Browns, but that is a really, really bad Browns offense that did figure out ways at times to threaten the Eagles. And, one play here or there, it might have looked a little bit different.
Geoff, you use the word and Lane Johnson used it. I'll follow with it. Why, in your mind, what you're watching, does this offense seem constipated? Why does it? And he's not wrong. It looks like an offense that's not exciting. This looks like an offense that we've seen last year, the year before. It doesn't look like a new, innovative offense. It doesn't look like somebody different came in here and brought in his own concepts. This offense looks very much like the offense of issues that they have had in the last season.
Right, which is why I'm seeing a whole lot of, well, this guy's got to go, fire this coach, fire that coach. And I keep saying, well, if you keep replacing coaches and keep replacing systems and keep replacing philosophies and you're not getting a good result, why is it always on the coaches all the time? It doesn't make sense to me. But I will say this. You and I had this discussion going into the year about when we do the off-season stuff, right? We say, well, what are kind of things that we look for, reasons that a team will be good? What are things that we look for that the reasons that the team might be bad? And we both agreed this had the talent of a top 5 offense. It should be a very, very explosive offense with the offensive line, with the weaponry, and with Jalen Hurts. I remember us both agreeing it should be no excuses. But I also remember saying to you my biggest fear would be sort of a repeat of that, I want to say 2020 year, I guess, when, Doug Peterson was kind of forced to add to his staff. He had Press Taylor. They made him bring in Marty Morningweg. They made him bring in Rich Scangarello. They made him bring in Andrew Briner. And then you got too many cooks in the kitchen, and you have different philosophies. And here now you've got Nick Sirianni, you have Kellen Moore, you have a quarterback in Jalen Hurts, and an offensive line coach / run game coach, Jeff Stoutland, who those two guys we've been told do not really like a lot of motion. Kellen Moore likes motion. Those other guys, Jalen Hurts is used to playing out of the shotgun. Kellen Moore likes to be able to go under center and get downhill running. You're not seeing any under center downhill and then play action off that. So this is where I say, is this the issue? The disconnect is that you've got personnel, coaches, and scheme that all are not on the same page and still trying to figure each other out.
The run game, what did you take? I'm watching the run game yesterday. And look, it's tough to criticize the run game this year because it's been the best part of the offense, especially when they've been missing parts. But play action is not a part of this offense. When you have 2 great receivers and then that running back, you're thinking play action. But they're never under center. The running back never gets a chance to kind of get his motion going. And I think there's a problem all over football with running games and stuff. But what do you make of this Eagles run game now that everybody's back?
Yeah, and again, it's all about the scheme that you're running and the person in control of it. I wouldn't have an issue with not seeing the under-centered downhill run game / lead to play action if, that wasn't Kellen Moore's thing. Andy Reid doesn't do a whole lot of that either, right? So I don't criticize them when they have a difficult time on offense, as they've had a few times over the last few years. But this is what Kellen Moore does, and this is supposed to make the offense simplified and give you some layups because you're running the ball well with Saquon Barkley, and then you're able to turn around, fake that handoff, and then find somebody deep or down the seam. So that's why I criticize it, is because that is what the offensive coordinator was supposed to bring, and you're not seeing it. And, yes, you didn't find it for the first time all year against the Browns. You didn't see an explosive element to the run game. I put that on. The Browns were they were depleted in the secondary, but they got Hurst back on the D-line. Obviously, Myles Garrett, I know he's banged up, but he's playing well. Their D-line and what Jim Schwartz is doing, putting a lot more guys in scrimmage than he used to do, certainly aided into that. But I was surprised not to see a more explosive run because usually Barkley gets 1 or 2. But as you said, it's not fair to expect Barkley to have 150 yards a game every single game. They're going to start scheming to stop him and making Jalen Hurts make those throws down the field, which he happened to make just enough to win.
Let's get into the passing game because, obviously they had some big plays. A.J. Brown, big play. Smith, big play. The play that sealed it, you can argue is a big play, but you could ask why are they even throwing the ball down the field in that situation. If they throw an incomplete pass on a low percentage throw, the clock stops in that spot. But they did have some big plays in the pass game. But it seems that the pass game is still a developing part of the game, part of their offense.
100%. And then you lose Dallas Goedert, so that doesn't help. And then you lose Jordan Mailata, although that was late. That's not an excuse. They certainly had enough weapons. Calcaterra made a few nice catches. There's not a good wedding or marriage right now between what they're doing in the run game and what they're doing in the pass game, which is why I believe Lane Johnson said, they almost look constipated because it's like they're trying so hard to force things and make things work. And it's putting a lot of pressure on them instead of just coming naturally. And it just doesn't look like a good flow. Now, remember, the Browns defense is pretty legit. The Browns have been awful, but I think they have a top 8 defense. Now, they lost some guys in the secondary, but they blitz more than ever under Jim Schwartz, and they do some interesting things. But And we're just kind of getting into the nitty-gritty of why the Eagles didn't do something here or there. I mean, they should look better. They should look more explosive. And I can only imagine the conversation you and I would be having right now if A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith still were out and not back, because this thing could have looked as bad as Tampa, right, if they didn't have that big play, the little bit of big play elements that they brought to that game. If they weren't bringing it, I don't know what that score would have looked like.
Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast, Football at 4 here on the Sports Bash, 97.3 ESPN. Yeah, I want to get your take on the defense, too, because, obviously they played a good game. They got to the quarterback. But how much stock do you put into it, and how much stock is that, look, this Cleveland team is historically bad. I mean, they haven't scored 20 points in any game this year. That has not happened for an offense since 2014, that you didn't score 20 points in your first 5 games. They're the worst team in football on third down, and yet they get a key third down late in the game that almost allowed them to get back in that or win that game. So what do you make of the defense and the effort they put forth yesterday? Is that more, hey, look, Deshaun Watson, that offense is just terrible, or no, Vic Fangio did a couple different things. He brought out some new plays and some tricks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a little bit of both. Look, it was good to see Bryce Huff show up on the stat sheet, and not just the stat sheet, but you could tell he made a little bit more of an impact in this game. I tell you, to your point where you said, the Browns made it close even with their limited offense, there was a play in the fourth quarter after the Eagles had gone ahead on the Devontae Smith touchdown. The Browns go right down the field, and then they draw up a design keeper right inside the Eagles 5, where Watson, turns the corner around the right side, and the whole offensive line convoy is blocking that way. Nolan Smith got off a block and forced him out of bounds, I think, or made a tackle right at the 2, and they don't score. And I was like, all right, you saw Nolan Smith get off a block, right, and make a really key tackle in that game, or else that would have been a touchdown that I think would have tied the game at that point. So progress there. Cooper DeJean playing nickel. Progress there. We saw run blitzes. I believe we'll see what Vic Fangio says tomorrow, but it certainly looked like the linebackers and even the nickel Cooper were attacking the gaps right at the snap to guard against the run. Although on the flip side, the negatives were I think the Browns actually still ran the ball fairly decently. They threw the ball at times at the edges where the Eagles have been exposed this year, especially against Tampa. They still were able to hit the edges pretty well. And if I were to have asked you, Mike, after the game, right, if I would have said, Mike Gill, you just watched the game, you haven't looked at the stat sheet, how many sacks do you think the Eagles had in this game? What do you think? What would your answer have been?
I know that's a good question, because I think they ended up with 5. And there was a time during the game I'm watching with my dad, and he's like, "Do they have a sack today?" I said, "They actually have 3." Like at that point, they had 3, but it didn't feel like it.
Yeah, they had 5 sacks altogether, actually, and it did not feel like it. And even those sacks that came, we'll go back and watch the all 22. I think Deshaun Watson sort of ran himself into a couple of them. So I'm not taking away from the Eagles defense, but what a 5-sack game looks like on some other games when you're beating your tackle and you're smothering the quarterback and somebody's getting the edge off the ball. Like, to me, the best sort of pass rushing type of play I saw was probably on a run where Brandon Graham just, totally comes in and tackles the guy on the jet fly motion there. So it didn't feel to me like there was enough pure, natural, one-on-one, beat-your-guy pass rush against a Browns deep offensive line that was down to its third center and, second right guard and I think second offensive tackle at one point. So I'm not sure that those ills have been cured yet.
Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast, Football at 4. We talked a little bit about the game. I want to bring it back to the Sirianni because they closed the game out. And he obviously goes out of his way. And listen, I mean, there's fire, Nick chants going on. People are frustrated with this team.
Yeah.
Now, I said yesterday, if he's retaliating by saying, I don't hear fire Nick now, that's almost a fireable offense. If I'm Jeffrey Lurie, I'm so embarrassed by that. And then, the McAfee show comes out and basically does a Saturday Night Live satirical thing on the whole situation. They've got a guy, I don't know if you ever watched the McAfee show, but, he does a fake Mel Kiper. They have him up there. Right, okay, so they have him up there impersonating Sirianni. He's got a rubber thing on his head to mock the fact that he shaved his head, and he's answering these questions. I mean, they're just making fun of the whole situation. If you're Jeffrey Lurie and you're seeing that on a day that you won a football game, if we heard the end of this, did he answer enough questions today that this is behind him?
I don't know, Mike. I think in the next coming days and weeks are going to be really important to answer that question. Certainly a big game against the Giants now on Sunday, who are formidable. You know, the Giants are formidable. Their record isn't great. They're not a good team, but they will challenge you. And if Malik Neighbors comes back, that's a guy who, you know, we have seen the Eagles not really fare well in the pass defense this year. So that'll be interesting. It's funny you bring up Jeffrey Lurie. I'll leave you with this because I've been thinking about him in a different, as it pertains to this team, but going back to the past and this past game against the Browns. Everybody remembers, or maybe I'll remind everybody, there was a game, I want to say 2019, against the Green Bay Packers on the road, prime time, that the Eagles won because they gave the ball to Jordan Howard and they ran the ball all over the Packers at a time where they were really struggling to pass the ball. But they weren't supposed to be that bad passing the ball with Carson Wentz, and, you know, that was a bad Green Bay team, but they were struggling all year long, right? You remember that, right? The owner didn't like that win. And he brought Doug and asked him all about why did we have to run the ball to win that game. That was not the way this team is designed. So given what we're already seeing with Sirianni, and given that they just played a game that I can't believe the owner is really thrilled about, you know what I'm saying, from an optics standpoint, like that Green Bay game, it certainly makes me wonder what's going on in his head.
We will see some more fallout, I'm sure. We'll see what happens next as the Eagles get ready for the Giants. And it was brought up today, the Eagles are 1-3 in their last 4 trips to Giants Stadium, MetLife Stadium, whatever you want to call it. But not good. And that's Giants team, you're right. You know what they're good? They're very good defensively. Their offense is a mess, but they are very good defensively. And by the way, they're a mess offensively. They should get Neighbors and Singletary back, you would assume, so they will get some more weapons. This is a game that, man, it is not one of those Giants teams that you're just going to walk into their building and push around with that defense that they play. But we'll continue to talk more about it here on Football at 4. Check out the Inside the Birds podcast. I'm sure this week you guys will have plenty to discuss as the Eagles beat the Cleveland Browns yesterday and now get ready for the New York Giants. All right, Moshe, appreciate it, bud.
Talk to you Wednesday, Mike. Take care.